Okay, if you are in English 1 Pre-AP, you have found the correct lesson for week 6 of at-home learning. This lesson today will be over rhetorical analysis. You will get a grade, a completion grade for completing this video lesson. There will be some questions in Schoology that will be randomized for you to answer to let me know that you did in fact complete this video lesson. And then session 2 will be the application of this lesson, where you will actually do rhetorical analysis over an article that you read last week. So with rhetorical analysis, you might recall that we broached the topic before we began To Kill a Mockingbird with an article about the N word and whether that word was ever appropriate and why. So with rhetorical analysis, we're going to be considering what choices the writer makes and what are the effects of those choices. So I'm going to give you a story that I made up that might help you kind of understand what rhetorical analysis does. Okay, so in this story, you see a picture of the stick figure here. This is Jan. Jan is a very prim and proper young lady, and she wants to treat her mother for Mother's Day to a very nice restaurant. But the problem is her mother is even more prim and more proper and more conservative than Jan herself. So Jan doesn't want to be embarrassed, so she's going to go to this restaurant that she's heard about, the 5 stars, and first check it out and make sure it's suitable for her mother. So she goes into the 5 stars restaurant, and the environment is very nice. The ambiance is comfortable. The staff greets her and takes her to a really nice table, so everything's going well. But then her waiter comes up to meet her, and while her waiter is very nice and friendly, she looks down at his uniform and notices, well, he's not wearing a uniform, but instead he is wearing a t-shirt, and on this t-shirt has a very offensive slogan with a curse word. And she's like, oh my goodness, I don't really know how to respond to that. And what if he's wearing that when my mother comes with me to this restaurant? I'm not so sure that she would be able to keep her mouth closed. She might be offended. So, and she's questioning that decision by the manager to allow the wait staff to wear just whatever they want. But then, after she orders her food, it's just amazing. The taste is wonderful. The price is good for the quantity and the quality of food. So she's impressed with that. So she's trying to weigh between, I don't know. I mean, it's really good food, but how's my mother going to handle this environment if the waiters come in wearing whatever they want? So in the last part of the visit, she goes to the restroom, and she's thinking, great, there is an attendant there to wait on me. But the attendant then asks her, how many squares do you need? Now, Jan realizes that this is the end of the quarantine, but she still is a little put off with this question. I mean, how do you decide how many squares of toilet paper you need, and why would you ever have to do that? So she's a little offended, and she doesn't really even know what to say, and then come to find out the toilet paper is just not even very good quality. So it's not a comfortable experience at all for Jan. So Jan has to make a decision about this restaurant. So what I want you to think about, we're going to make this analogy fit for rhetorical analysis. The restaurant is like a text that you would read or a speech that you would read and analyze. And the restaurant made some choices. They chose what the wait staff would wear. They made choices about the kinds of food that they would include. And they made some choices about what kind of toilet paper would be found in the restroom. But how Jan responds to that is the effect of those choices that the restaurant made. And the effect depends on context. It depends on who's reading those clues and what's going on. Now, that the t-shirt that the waiter is wearing, I mean, it might be fine at a different location, but if the waiter is supposed to be serving the public, the effect may not be so positive for that restaurant. Now, the food being amazing, that's wonderful. That's a positive effect. But possibly if there was another person that was there, they might not think that the food was equally amazing. Okay, so when you're looking at text, kind of think back to this restaurant story that with rhetorical analysis, you're always looking at the choices that the writer makes and the effects of those choices when you are analyzing. So I'm going to go through this slideshow really quickly so I can get to the crux of the message. But don't worry, because there will be a copy of this slideshow in Schoology so that you can reference it as we continue forward. The end result is that we will be writing a rhetorical analysis, but not this week. We will just begin with the pre-writing phase of establishing what we're analyzing this week. Okay, so what is rhetorical analysis? It's the analysis of how an author achieves his or her purpose via those specific strategies. So we're always wanting to ask ourselves this question: what is the author's purpose? And then what strategies or choices help that author achieve the purpose? If you're a visual person, this might be helpful. You see this picture here of Martin Luther King Jr., and you may know about his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. This situation, his speech, would obviously be like the restaurant. It is the actual text we would be looking at, but then we have to consider all of these other elements: the author, the purpose, the setting, the audience, who is there. So to help you realize like what the parts are that you need to consider, we're going to use an acronym called CAP, C-A-P-P. That's going to help us identify the elements of the rhetorical situation. C for context, A for audience, persona, and purpose. So let's look at context a little more closely. With context, you need to consider when the text is written, when it is presented, and maybe how that relates to the message. So if a speech was written in 1812, right before the War of 1812, then it would mean something different to the audience who was about to go to war versus a modern audience, because that event has already occurred. Place, where it's written, where it was presented, and how that connects to the message. The people who are involved in the situation, so whether the people who are listening are thinking about the situation in a positive way or a negative way would affect it. What other events are going on, and what has caused that author to decide to write that message. And then something we're going to talk about now is the motivating force behind that speaker. So a word you'll hear in Ms. Davis's class when you get to AP English 4 is the word exigence. So that's the motivating force behind the speaker. So let's talk about that motivating force. You want to think about what is the reason behind that message. Is it because of love or compassion, jealousy, gratitude, envy? So it's that driving, motivating factor that would cause a person to actually sit down and put pen to paper or to begin typing those words. So what caused them to write? Now let's look at the A. A is for audience. So there is an immediate audience, which it's immediately intended for. So for example, in the Malala speech, all of those who were there that day when she delivered the speech would be the immediate audience, and the mitigated audience are other people who would likely hear that speech. So for you, you would be that example, other people who might want to know more about it. You're going to consider the knowledge of the audience, the attitudes of the audience, and the beliefs of that audience, and how that affects the message. The last P stands for persona, and this is where you're going to actually consider the person who delivered the speech. So how does the author want to be perceived? How does this relate to what the message is and how it's presented? So here's a little fill in the blank for you. You would say something like, the author wants to seem blank, so he or she does what? What do they do to make themselves be perceived in a way that's favorable in that situation? So consider about also, what does the author presume about his or her audience or the readers' feelings toward the author? How does this relate to what the message is and how it's presented? So, for example, in Malala's case, because she realizes that she's so much younger than many who are in the audience, what does she do to try to establish her credibility within that particular group of people that she's speaking to. I'm sorry, the last P is not persona. The last P is for purpose. Okay, so once you've gone through context, audience, and persona, you can actually start thinking about the purpose. And this is the main point the author wants to accomplish or get across. You would state that as an infinitive phrase, so to plus a strong specific verb and a clarifying explanation. So here's the example. So here's the purpose of this mini lesson: to instill, there's your infinitive, both the importance of the rhetorical situation and how to express it in my students. Okay, so I want you to understand, and I actually need to change some words because it said how to express it to my students would be better. But this would be a way of how you would write that purpose statement out. To plus an infinitive. Okay, so let's do some practice now. So let's analyze a rhetorical situation together. So for context, we are going to view a video trailer for the movie Dodgeball.
1954, a simpler time.
Dodgeball is a sport of violence, exclusion, and degradation.
A more innocent time.
Make sure you pick the bigger, stronger kids for your team. That way, you can all gang up on the weaker ones. Ooh, you're out for a dodgeball!
Today, there are those who are born to be champions.
Here at Globo Gym, we're better than you, and we know it.
And then, there are these guys.
Boom, 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 boom.
Do you know why I'm here?
Now, do you mean cosmically?
You have 30 days to pay off your mortgage or you lose your gym.
Who'd want to buy this place anyway? Okay.
We can't just let Globo Gym take us over.
If there was any way in the world we could raise $50,000,
We could play dodgeball.
Line up, ladies! The name's Patches O'Houlihan, and I'm your new coach. You gotta get angry!
Guess I'm not really an angry person.
Are you angry now?
20th Century Fox invites you
Welcome to this year's Las Vegas Dodgeball Open.
to experience the world of dodgeball
There's a souvenir for a lucky fan.
with the ultimate underdogs.
The real team needs real uniforms. I hope they fit.
nice.
You guys suck!
Thank you. Nice to be in Vegas. You should quit now. I think I'll take my chances in the tournament.
Yeah, you will take your chances.
That's what I just said.
That's what I'm saying to you.
All right.
Touche.
Vince Vaughn,
You dig me?
You do have brief moments where you're not completely...
When I'm not completely what?
Pathetic.
Ben Stiller,
We should mate.
What?
I said we should date.
I just threw up in my mouth a little bit.
Christine Taylor,
You like the rough stuff, huh? Real freaking naughty.
I love you!
I love you too. Joni loves Chachi.
Grab Life by the ball.
You ready for the hurricane?
Pepper needs new shorts!
Well, at least that wasn't weird.
Dodgeball, a true underdog story.
You can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball.
What?
And what followed, there was a lot of buzz. Let me read you. This is the actual piece of text that we are going to analyze together. So I'll read it to you. Follow along with me. This is from the National Association for Sport and Physical Education. And the National Association for Sport and Physical Education sets the standard, and this is a position statement. So an official statement on dodgeball in physical education. Here we go. With the recent release of both a movie, that would be the movie Dodgeball, and a television show about dodgeball, debate about the game's merits and improprieties has escalated in the media and on the NASPE listserv. Thus, the National Association for Sport and Physical Education would like to reiterate its position about including dodgeball in school physical education programs. Okay, so what do they think about having dodgeball in school activities? NASPE believes that dodgeball is not an appropriate activity for K through 12 school physical education programs. The purpose of physical education is to provide students with the knowledge, skills, and confidence needed to be physically active for a lifetime, a daily dose of physical activity for health benefits, positive experiences so that kids want to be physically active outside of physical education class and throughout their lifetime. Continuing on. The goals of physical education can be obtained through a wide variety of appropriate physical activities. Getting and keeping children and adolescents active is one of the biggest challenges facing parents and youth leaders. And then they give us some statistics here. 61.5% of children aged 9 to 13 years do not participate in any organized physical activity during their non-school hours, and 22.6% do not engage in any free time physical activity. 1/3 of high school students are not adequately active, and over 10% do not participate in any physical activity at all. And 16% of United States youth aged 6 to 19 are overweight, triple the proportion of 25 years ago. And then here we have a fact. According to NASPE's Appropriate Practices for Elementary School Physical Education in the year 2000, in a quality physical education class, teachers involve all children in activities that allow them to participate actively, both physically and mentally. Activities such as, okay, so I think they're going to probably list out those things. So first, you notice that they listed out what they think is important as far as standards. They then followed it up with facts about activity, current activity, and then here we have, let me finish that up. It says activities such as relay races, dodgeball, and elimination tag provide limited opportunities for everyone in the class, especially the slower, less agile students who need the activity the most. In other words, in those kinds of activities, if you're not very active and you need to be active, you're usually the first ones out in those activities. And as someone who was not very physically agile, I would have to say that's true. The students who are eliminated first in dodgeball are typically the ones who most need to be active and practice their skills. Many times these students are also the ones with the least amount of confidence in their physical abilities, being targeted because they are the, quote, weaker players, and being hit by a hard-thrown ball does not help kids to develop confidence. The arguments most often heard in favor of dodgeball are that it allows for the practice of important physical skills and kids like it. And then they're going to follow this up with, so they have a counterclaim. This is why some people might say that dodgeball's good, but they say dodgeball does provide a means of practicing some important physical skills: running, dodging, throwing, and catching. However, there are many activities that allow practice of these skills without using human targets or eliminating students from play. Some kids may like it, the most skilled, the most confident, but many do not! Exclamation point. Certainly not the student who gets hard in the stomach, head, or groin. And it is not appropriate to teach our children that you win by hurting others. In a recent article about the new GSN Games Network TV show called Extreme Dodgeball, there is talk of developing and executing extreme strategies to annihilate opponents, and the use of terms such as throw-to-kill ratios and headshots. NASPE asks, is this the type of game that you want children to be exposed to? And then there is a citation. Okay, so there is the article, and then I will show you how we would analyze this, and this part is done for you, and you will do something similar in your Session 2 activity. You will answer these questions about the Malala article that you can reread if you need to, and I would suggest that you do that. I would also suggest that you kind of take notes as you reread it again or review it to do the activity. Okay, so we're going to use this form here. And it's quarantine day number 4,372, thereabouts somewhere. So before you come up with a thesis before, like what's the effect of Malala Yousafzai's speech, or what's the effect of this NASPE position statement, you need to first understand the author's purpose for that text. So we're going to start with these questions. So who is the author of this text? I could go back to that position statement and I would find the name of the organization and who they are specifically. So I know it's the National Association for Sport and Physical Education, and they're the organization that's responsible for PE teachers, and they set standards for physical activity in schools. So what caused them to write this position statement? So One of the things was that dodgeball was being played in schools. There was also a movie that came out about dodgeball, and also a TV show escalating the debate over dodgeball's merits and whether it would be good for schools. So who is the audience? Who would be reading this message? Obviously, PE teachers. Parents maybe would read this, and then anybody else who would want what's best for children. It's not really for students per se. Most people that would be reading that would be parents and teachers as far as who is making the curriculum. Okay, so then the next thing you're going to do, if you notice this, it says scan the text and underline any clues about why the author wrote it. Okay, so those could be sentences, phrases, or even verbs that help you understand the author's purpose, where you're trying to figure out the exigence of why they wrote it. Now, step back and look at your notes and underline those clues. What does the author want the audience to think or feel as a result of this piece of writing? Okay, well, it's pretty clear that they don't want us to think dodgeball is a suitable activity for children. So we would write it this way. We're going to use that same thing with the infinitive. So the NASPE's purpose is to reiterate that dodgeball is not an appropriate activity for K through 12 PE programs. Okay, so we're going to follow the guidelines where we're going to use the infinitive phrase to reiterate. Okay, that's the purpose. Now we're going to look at the choices they made. Think about the restaurant. The restaurant made choices about what the wait staff would wear. They made choices about what would be in the restrooms. So what kind of rhetorical choices did NASPE make about how to get their message across? So those would be rhetorical choices for writing. So patterns you see. Whether you see how they organize their writing. Also, sentence structure. Do you see examples of logos, pathos, ethos? All of those strategies we've looked at before. So here's one for, they've listed the purpose of PE classes, and then they list those statistics. So organization was important, that show the challenges that parents and leaders are having in accomplishing these purposes. Then NASPA reveals how dodgeball limits accomplishing those purposes. Okay, so they've set up their argument. Here's what we're trying to do. Here are the statistics. Here's our problem. And look how dodgeball does not measure up to what our problem is. Another strategy is that they're using some strongly negative connotative diction. They're using metaphors such as weaker players, throw-to-kill ratios, headshots to reveal that the game has a negative connotation because of the terminology used with the game. Okay, so you want to identify at least 2 to 3 rhetorical choices that are made. And then finally, it'll take you to a thesis statement. So you're going to sum up in 1 or 2 sentences how the author uses these key rhetorical choices to achieve the purpose. So your thesis statement would follow this method that you see here on the screen. So in this one, in its statement to PE teachers and parents in response to the debate over dodgeball and education, the NASPA reiterates that dodgeball is not appropriate in PE class by revealing that dodgeball does not meet the criteria for physical education and highlighting its negative consequences for children. So notice, they're telling us first, the first part of that, they're giving us the context of when it was written and why. In response to, in its statement, in response to the debate, who is the person? Who is the audience? The NASPA reiterates what? What is their point? That dodgeball is not appropriate in PE class. How do they do that? By revealing that dodgeball does not meet the criteria for physical education and highlighting its negative consequences for children. Okay, so you will follow a particular structure just like we have in our literary analysis essays as well. And for session 2, you're going to review Malala Yousafzai's speech from last week and answer the same questions about her speech's rhetorical situation. And the end goal is in the next 2 weeks, we will write a fully developed rhetorical analysis for Yousafzai's speech. So the better you look at this speech this week and analyze it, then the easier it will be for you in the upcoming weeks to write the rhetorical analysis essay. Okay, so hopefully this will help you to think back to the dodgeball speech whenever you are doing the second activity for English 1 Pre-AP. Hope you have a good day. Thanks for listening.